guys, welcome back to the horror with your hostess with the mostest, Jebel, as always. Welcome back. So, you guys, tonight what I want to talk about is about the 90s, because I've actually been thinking a lot lately about horror movies of the 90s. Now, for a lot of us who've lived through it, who were kind of like um, already born, already kind of maybe coming up on being an actual child or being pretty well immersed in the 90s, we all kind of know and remember that horror movies back then, especially early to mid 90s, were not all the greatest. It was kind of at a lull with horror movies, 80s, golden age horror and everything. We had all these great horror movies, not so much, or I should say, not everything was so great in the 80s with horror movies. Um, the 90s, especially the early to mid 90s, were pretty notorious for not producing the greatest, at least at the time. It seemed like really just not a whole lot of like really great things. And when you take a look back at that period, kind of like the pre-Scream period, basically that's how the 90s were broken up. The before Scream and then after Scream. So, but early 90s, and I'll even talk a little bit about like the late 90s, the post Scream and everything. But back then, like I said, 80s were over and everything. Golden Age of horror was done. All of our kind of icons of the 80s were being killed off. Jason was killed off. Freddy was killed off. They both went to hell basically. And, therefore it was kind of like we now had no actual like really icons. We had, like a couple of Halloween movies in the 90s, but a lot of it just was not at the time very favorable and everything. Although now I feel looking back, it's a lot of those movies, especially like the early 90s, have definitely started getting a little noticed, getting a little appreciated and everything. A couple of instances, like one that I feel like I'm not even sure if this was really well received at the time because I was still pretty young and I didn't really pay attention too much of like box office, what was, cool, what was making money, what was creating buzz. But one that I really love is Candyman. I feel like a lot of people, that's a good franchise. That first one, just so good. I know I've done a movie review on it. I may return to doing that review. I may do another review on that movie. Not too sure, maybe one day. But that was I feel like that was a good sort of movie to sort of try to kickstart a little bit, or at least give some of us diehard horror fans something to view, something to look forward to and really enjoy. Like I said, that's a very well done movie. Still to this day, it's one of my favorites. It's up there. I would say it's probably maybe one of my top tens on most days. I mean, you got Tony Todd, Virginia Madsen, dealing with some urban legends and stuff. I love urban legends, so any sort of movie that involves some urban legends hype or a little bit of a reminiscence of urban legends itself or influenced by urban legends, I'm all for. But other than that, though, a lot of like movies were, at the time were just like stupid. That's stupid. Like one that I truly love, that I know, like when it first came out, like I even remember my sister Megan being like, "Dude, that movie's so stupid." But it's definitely grown an audience. It's definitely become, I feel like a fan favorite, and definitely has gotten noticed and has received the credit it deserves. Is Brain Scan with Edward Furlong. That movie, and I love that movie. Even back then when I saw it, I still really enjoyed it. And I think the reason why I love it so much is because it's like when I think of the 90s, especially the early 90s, a lot of what that movie has just totally just brings and reeks of the 90s, early 90s, because it does play off with like virtual reality and everything and all that. And at the time, you have to keep in mind, for all you little youngins out there, virtual reality was like a huge thing. Like, I know there was kind of like things that like they were trying to toy with and everything, but virtual reality at the time just really wasn't going to be much of a thing or anything, because when you think about it, home computers were just becoming a thing. Computers were just starting to become affordable for home use and everything. So, I mean, literally, pretty much all you could do on a lot of like early computers were like SimCity and like a word processor. Like it's not like it is today. Our game consoles were Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, a Jaguar, if you could afford it and stuff. So it was kind of like at the beginning of the huge boom of like technology and everything. And to me, it was like, oh my god, that'd be so cool if we could like have virtual reality like that and stuff. It would be like really cool. It's so 90s, and like I said, that's one of those movies that like I think of 90s and that movie comes to mind because it's so 90s. Kind of like the same sense when we get something from Horror Pack, or we come across a new movie or something, like, oh, it's got that humor, that like 80s horror humor. Kind of the same sense basically, when you talk about that movie for me. um but yeah, that's one that I love. I need to get that in my collection actually, but one of these days, you guys, one of these days. But then of course, we had Scream, come along in '96. 4 days before Christmas that year, it opened, and that that is credited to kind of reviving the horror film genre and everything, because of like the stuff that it featured, or like it kind of it was self-aware and everything. It had like the humor and everything, and much like how like over a decade, like about a decade and a half earlier, with you want to compare like Halloween and the original Black Christmas. Black Christmas was kind of the first slasher movie to come along, but because it didn't do well, and because Halloween was such a huge smash hit, Halloween was the one that was credited to kickstarting the slasher movement. Fast forward a decade, almost over a decade later, to part 6 of Friday the 13th. Now that sequel, has a lot of like similarities, with Scream, in that what I mean is like the self awareness, the humor and everything. But because it was a sequel and everything, and the one previous to that installment didn't do well. That movie did not get like any credit at all. Plus, I mean, it was part of the '80s, so it's kind of like it was a little like watered down and saturated at that point with horror movies. So then, fast forward about 9 years later with Scream, and that's the one that, uh, like I said, is credited to kickstarting, or reviving, I should say, the horror genre. And then from there on out, everything was influenced by Scream, which, I mean, nothing wrong with that. We see trends every few years. Like right now, I mean, I feel like we're kind of starting to get back into, hey, we're getting some new stuff in horror. We just had Split, we have Get Out. So I think people are kind of really trying to like find that movie that people are wanting to see. The audiences are wanting to go and see something nice and fresh. But anyway, we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about the 90s. So yeah, I mean, we had the Scream movies, and then after the first Scream, like I said, everything was kind of influenced by Scream. Everything seemed to have a little bit of like the Scream print on it and everything, just that impression of Scream, which is not a big deal because, it did, like I said, it kind of re-kickstarted the horror genre and everything. So you did see, movies after that with a little bit of like self-awareness and everything. Um, but, at the same time, I feel like, okay, so now you're just saying that us horror fans are stupid because you got to put this stuff in. But different video altogether. But yeah, some of the movies that I really enjoyed from like the post Scream, one that in particular that always stands out that I've always loved. Once again, subject matter I love. If you couldn't really guess, urban legends. That first movie, a great cast. I really do enjoy that cast. It had a really good cast. Like, I feel like everyone associated in that film for me, job well done. Job well done. But like I said, it's just little things like that. Even like Halloween H2O, as much as I'm like, eh, you know, but whatever, but whatever. But I feel like once again, like I said, I feel like the '90s in general, with Scream, pre-Scream, post-Scream, I feel like a lot of these movies are definitely um, are really now being noticed. Over the last few years have really been kind of like people are really kind of like rewatching these and are like, some of those movies aren't too bad. Obviously, we had some really like goofy ones. Like I remember, it's funny because I was actually watching this a few months back. I remember seeing it when I was a kid on like TV. This movie called Ticks. Talk about cheesy. And like I hate like bug type movies and stuff, but that movie just cracks me up. It does. But so I mean we got a lot of like goofy, cheesy horror movies like that, or a movie called Ants, which I think has Gunnar Hansen in it. So we got a lot of like honestly a lot of like shitty ones where some people kind of do appreciate. I ain't gonna knock them for it, but '90s were a tough time as a horror fan. But like I said, they're now getting appreciated. Those movies that came out and everything. So but yeah, that's just my little spiel about the '90s. Maybe I'll do another video about the '90s. I'm not sure, but you guys, I'm gonna call it a night. Thank you once again for checking me out, listening to me, and everything. Let me know what you think of the '90s. Let me know some of your favorite '90s movies. Because you guys know I love hearing your thoughts, your opinions, and everything. So till next time, you guys, as always, stay creepy, classy, and a little bit sassy.